At 8:35, the laundry room still held the dryer's warmth. The first rush had passed. Shoes had crossed the floor, a backpack had been lifted, a car door had closed, and somewhere behind all of it, the house had begun to loosen its grip. She stood beside the dryer with one hand resting near the metal edge. In the other hand was a bent grocery receipt, folded once by accident, then again by habit. Her phone stayed quiet for a moment, though one message was still waiting. Not answered yet. That was all. The dryer turned slowly into its last few sounds, soft and uneven, while the rest of the house faded into a smaller kind of noise. For once, strength did not need to look busy. It could stand there, warm-handed, holding a receipt, letting one small thing wait. The bent grocery receipt had no reason to matter. It was only paper, thin and soft at the fold, with the ink already looking a little tired. A few numbers ran down the center. Milk. Bread. Apples. Detergent. Something bought because the house had run low, because someone noticed, because noticing was part of the work no one always named. She had found it in her coat pocket when she came into the laundry room. It had been pressed there under her keys, under a wrapper, under the small dull weight of the morning. It was the kind of thing a person almost throws away without looking. But she held it. The dryer was still warm beside her. That warmth was simple. It did not ask what had been finished, or what was still undone, or why one person could feel so tired before the day had really opened. It just stayed there in the metal, in the towels inside, in the faint smell of clean fabric and heat. The first rush had already moved through the house. The quick breakfast. The shoes found under a chair. The voice calling from another room. The door opening, closing, opening again. The little corrections, the forgotten thing, the car seat sound, the bag sliding across the back seat. The part of the morning that never felt dramatic, only full. She had done it. Not perfectly. Not calmly the whole time. Not with the kind of patience people imagine they would have if life gave them more sleep and fewer small emergencies. But she had done it, and now the laundry room held the few minutes after. The house did not become silent. It rarely did. Somewhere, a pipe shifted. The refrigerator made its low sound from the kitchen. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street. But the sharp edge of the morning had gone somewhere else for a while. There was room to hear the dryer. Her phone was on the small shelf near the detergent. Face up, then face down, then face up again. One message waited there, a plain little square of need. It was not cruel. It was not urgent in the way emergencies are urgent. It was only another person asking something, another thread tied to her name. She looked at it once. Then she left it. For now. That small leaving did not feel brave. It did not feel like a decision anyone would notice. No one would come into the laundry room and say she had done something important by not answering right away. No one would mark it down, or thank her, or understand how much of her life was made of answering before she had even taken a breath. But her hand stayed around the bent receipt, and her shoulders lowered a little. Only a little. That was enough for the room. Older sisters learn early how to listen for what is missing. A quiet room can mean peace, or it can mean someone needs to be checked on. A closed door can mean privacy, or it can mean a feeling has gone too long without words. A grocery list can become a map of who eats what, who forgets lunch, who needs the good soap, who will not say they are running out. She had carried that listening into work, too. Into the hallway. Into the clock. Into the way she answered people before they finished asking. She could be helpful without seeming strained. She could sound fine. She could move quickly enough that no one saw the small pause before she said yes. The performance of strength was not always loud. Sometimes it was a smile beside the time clock. Sometimes it was making one more stop on the way home because the detergent was almost gone. Sometimes it was standing in the school pickup line with the workday still clinging to her clothes, looking through the windshield at other cars, other tired faces, other people holding together their own invisible lists. And sometimes, it was standing in the laundry room at 8:35 in the morning, still half between work and home, still carrying voices that were no longer in the room. The dryer slowed. One turn. Then another. Inside, the clothes shifted with a soft, heavy sound. Not finished in a grand way. Just almost done. Warm enough to fold soon. Quiet enough to leave for another minute. She rubbed her thumb along the crease in the receipt. The paper bent more easily where it had already been bent. There was something kind in that. Not a lesson. Not a reason. Just the plain fact that some things soften where the day has pressed them. Her phone remained unanswered. The world did not fall apart. The dryer kept turning, and the house kept holding its small morning sounds. For a few breaths, she did not have to prove that she could carry more. She did not have to reach for the next thing before the last thing had left her hands. She could stand there, beside the warm dryer, with a receipt bent in her palm. The laundry room was not a room people noticed unless something went wrong. A missing sock. A towel left too long. A shirt needed before work. The faint beep that meant the cycle had ended and someone, usually her, had to remember it before the day moved on. It was not a room for resting. It was a room for keeping things from piling up. But that morning, it became somewhere else. The dryer gave off a low warmth. Not heat exactly. More like the last bit of effort still living in the metal, the kind that stays after the work has technically finished. She could feel it near her hip as she stood there, close enough to touch it, not yet opening the door. There were clothes inside waiting to be folded. There was always something waiting. The receipt in her hand had come from the grocery store after work the day before. She remembered the fluorescent lights, the cart with one wheel that pulled a little to the left, the line of people holding small dinners and tired faces. She had stopped for only a few things, but the few things had become more. Juice because it was on sale. Bananas because someone liked them green. Dryer sheets because the box at home had only one left. A loaf of bread because bread disappearing was one of the quiet mysteries of a household. She had stood there with her work shoes still on, checking the total, holding the card reader until it beeped. Then she had gone to school pickup. Then home. Then dinner, dishes, the small argument about homework, the quick answer to a work message she wished she had left until morning. Then a load of laundry because tomorrow had already reached into today and asked for clean clothes. Now the receipt was bent across her palm. The numbers on it were not beautiful. They were not meant to be. But they carried the shape of care in a way care often does, without announcement, without softness around the edges. Food. Soap. Paper towels. Ordinary evidence that someone had walked through a store while tired and still remembered the house. Her phone lit up again. She saw the edge of the message without touching it. A name. A few words. Another small opening where her attention could be pulled. It was not a bad person. It was not a bad need. That was part of what made it hard. So many things asking from her were not wrong. They were only more. She looked away. In the other part of the house, something settled with a faint click. Maybe the furnace. Maybe a door that had not been fully closed. The sound was small enough that anyone moving quickly would miss it. But standing still made the house audible again. That was strange, sometimes. How much life was there when she stopped rushing long enough to hear it? The dryer rolled once, slowly. A towel slid against the inside with a heavy softness. She pictured the clothes turning over each other in the dark, no longer being washed, no longer being dried, simply waiting in warmth. She did not open the door yet. Not yet. The morning had already required her voice in several versions. The voice that hurried kindly. The voice that answered a question from the back seat. The voice that told herself where the keys were, where the lunchbox was, what time she had to be where. The voice that sounded calm enough on the phone at work, even when she had been standing in the break room with cold coffee in one hand. Now there was no version needed. There was only the dryer. Only the receipt. Only the message she had not answered. She leaned her shoulder lightly against the wall beside the machine. The paint was cool through her sleeve. It surprised her, the coolness of it, beside all that warmth. The laundry room held both without needing to choose. Maybe that was why she stayed. A small room can be kind without trying. It can hold the hum, the folded paper, the delayed reply, the half-tired body. It can let a person be someone other than useful for a minute. The receipt bent a little more as her hand relaxed. She noticed the line where the paper had been folded over the price of detergent. She had bought the cheaper one, the brand that worked well enough. She could almost see herself comparing labels under the store lights, not making a big thing of it, only doing what needed doing. That was a life, too. Not only the large parts. Not only the parts people asked about. Also the comparing, the carrying, the remembering, the leaving one message for later because a warm machine and a quiet room had finally made a little space. The dryer slowed again. This time she heard the pause between the turns. The stillness did not arrive all at once. It came in small pieces, the way quiet often does after a busy morning. First the dryer slowed. Then the house sound spread out, leaving more space between them. Then her own breathing became something she could notice without trying. She had not noticed it before. During the rush, breathing was just part of moving. In the car. At work. At the school curb. In the doorway with one hand on a bag and the other reaching for something someone had forgotten. Breath had been there underneath it all, but it had not belonged to her in any clear way. Now it did. She stood beside the dryer and let the phone stay where it was. The message could wait a little longer. Not forever. Not because she did not care. Only because there was a small piece of the morning that had opened, and she was inside it before it closed again. That was rare enough. The receipt warmed slightly in her hand. Maybe from her palm. Maybe from the room. The paper was thin, but it had carried so much through the last day. The store. The checkout lane. The parking lot. The car. The kitchen counter. Her coat pocket. Now the laundry room. Small things travel with us. Sometimes they know the shape of a day better than we do. She looked at the receipt again, not really reading it now. The printed lines had begun to blur into ordinary marks. It did not need to be understood. It only needed to be held. Proof of errands. Proof of keeping up. Proof of a tired person still choosing apples, still remembering soap, still putting one more needed thing into the cart. The dryer made another slow turn. There was something about that sound that lowered the room. A soft shifting, then a pause. A soft shifting, then a pause. Not silence, but close enough to rest beside. She felt the sound move through the metal and into the floor, faintly, almost gone. She had been around machines like this all her life. Washers, dryers, dishwashers, cars warming in driveways, coffee makers in early kitchens. Machines that kept going while people moved around them. Machines that made the background of care sound ordinary. Maybe that was why the laundry room felt private. No one came here for conversation. No one asked for a story in here. The room did not need her to be interesting, cheerful, prepared, or generous. It only held the baskets, the detergent, the lint caught in the filter, the sleeves turned inside out. It held what was unfinished without judging it. A blue towel pressed against the dryer door. Through the small round window, she could see a corner of it, then not see it, then see it again. It appeared and disappeared with each turn, like something almost ready to be gathered. She thought of the school pickup line from the day before. Cars idling under pale light. A child stepping down from the curb. Her own hand lifting in the small wave that said, "I see you, I am here." There had been nothing special about it, nothing anyone would remember from outside. But inside her body, it had been one more arrival. One more proof of showing up. Now, in the laundry room, she did not need to arrive anywhere. She let her shoulders settle more fully against the wall. The cool paint held steady. The dryer held warmth. The receipt held its little list of ordinary needs. The phone held one unanswered message. And for a moment, nothing asked to be changed. That may have been the part she was grateful for, though she would not have used that word yet. It was too early for naming. Too soon to make the moment carry meaning. The room was enough without being turned into anything. The dryer clicked once. Then it kept turning. She listened to that last motion as if it had been waiting for her to stop long enough to hear it. Not loud. Not important. Just present. A household sound fading into morning. A receipt softening in her hand. A woman standing still before the next responsibility found her name. She did not move when the dryer stopped. The last turn came and went, and then the room held a different kind of quiet. No rolling sound now. No soft weight shifting behind the door. Only the small click of the machine, the low hush of the house, and the warmth still gathered inside the metal. The clothes were ready. She knew that. She had known many things were ready before she was. A child ready to be picked up. A shift ready to begin. A phone call ready to be returned. A bill ready to be paid. A basket ready to be folded. Life had a way of standing at the edge of a room with its hand raised, waiting for her to notice. Most of the time, she noticed. That was part of being the older sister, even now. Not because anyone had officially given her the role. It had simply grown around her, little by little, through years of being the one who remembered, the one who checked, the one who could read a small change in a voice and know something else was underneath. She had learned to move toward need before need became loud. It was useful. It was tiring. Both could be true in the same body. The receipt rested against her palm, folded into a small uneven square. She could feel the raised edge where the paper had bent. The corner brushed her thumb each time her hand moved. Such a small thing, and still it kept her company. Her phone stayed on the shelf. She could imagine the message waiting there, unchanging, glowing only when the screen woke. It had become almost another object in the room. Like the detergent cap. Like the lint brush. Like the sock that had fallen behind the basket and would be found later, when someone had time to bend down. Later. That word had its own kind of mercy. Not everything refused had to be abandoned. Not everything unanswered had to mean absence. Sometimes later was only a small door left open, a way to keep from giving away the last quiet part of yourself before you had even noticed it was there. She breathed in. The laundry room smelled like warm cotton and faint soap. Underneath it was the plain smell of the house in the morning, the one no candle could imitate. Coffee cooling somewhere. Shoes near a door. A little dust under the machines. The lived-in air that comes after people leave and their movement still remains. She thought of work for a second, then let it pass. The fluorescent ceiling there. The steady requests. The way everyone sounded a little hurried, even when they were trying not to. She thought of the school curb again, the slow line of cars, the quick wave, the bag tossed into the back seat, the question asked before the door had fully closed. Then she returned to the dryer. It was easier to be here. Not easy in a dramatic way. Just easier than being everywhere at once. She opened her hand and looked at the receipt lying there. The crease had deepened. One line of ink had faded under the fold until the total was partly hidden. Maybe that was why it felt less like a record and more like something human. It had been carried too long to remain flat. She almost smiled at that. Almost. The room asked nothing from her smile. That was another kindness. For a moment, she did not have to make her face acceptable. She did not have to soften her answer before giving it. She did not have to turn tiredness into humor, or care into efficiency, or worry into a clean sentence someone else could receive. She could be quiet without explaining the quiet. The dryer gave off one small settling sound, as if something inside had shifted after stopping. It was hardly anything. But she heard it, and hearing it made the room feel less empty. A house can witness without speaking. The thought passed through her gently and did not ask to be kept. The wall stayed cool against her shoulder. The receipt stayed bent. The phone stayed unanswered. The clothes waited in warmth, still gathered together behind the closed door. She knew she would fold them soon. She would open the dryer, pull out towels and shirts, shake one item loose from another, smooth a sleeve, match what could be matched. She would answer the message. She would step back into the day, because the day was not finished with her. But not yet. There was still this narrow place between one turn ending and the next responsibility arriving. A little room, barely visible, but real enough to stand inside. She let herself remain there. The longer she stood there, the less the room felt like a pause stolen from the day. It felt like a pause the day had finally given back. Not much. Not enough to change the whole shape of things. The dryer still waited to be opened. The message still waited on the shelf. The receipt still lay bent in her hand, carrying its small list of what had been needed and what had been bought. But the morning had loosened. That mattered. The first rush had gone out through the front door with the backpack and the car keys and the voices. The workday had not fully returned yet. School pickup was still behind her, but the memory of it had softened. For once, she was not standing inside the exact second someone needed something from her. She was standing after. There was a tenderness in after that people did not always notice. After the door closes. After the car pulls away. After the dryer stops. After the last towel turns and settles into warmth. After the question has been answered, or not answered yet. After the body keeps moving for a few seconds before it realizes there is nowhere immediate to go. She stayed with that. The phone screen did not light this time. Or maybe it did, and she did not look. Either way, the message became less powerful while it waited. It was still there. It would have its turn. But in this narrow stretch of morning, it did not get to be the whole room. The room belonged to quieter things. The warmth inside the dryer. The paper against her palm. The small sound of the house settling back into itself. She opened the dryer door at last, slowly enough that the hinge made only a soft sound. Warm air moved out and touched her wrist. It smelled like cotton, soap, and something almost clean enough to be called comfort. She stood there with the door open and did not reach in right away. The clothes were piled together, folded by heat instead of hands. A towel near the front held the shape of the turn it had just taken. A shirt sleeve lay across it. One sock had tucked itself into the corner, as if it had found a private place. She looked at them without hurry. Then she set the bent receipt on top of the dryer. It made no sound. That was the first thing she had set down. Not the heavy things. Not the old habits. Not every expectation that had learned her name. Only a receipt. Only a thin piece of paper that had traveled with her longer than it needed to. But when it left her hand, her fingers opened a little more than they had before. Small releases count quietly. She reached into the dryer and lifted one towel. It was warm enough to hold against her for a second before folding it. She did not make a ceremony of it. She only pressed it once between her hands, then folded it in half. The movement was familiar. So familiar it almost did itself. That was the strange mercy of ordinary tasks. Sometimes they asked for too much. Sometimes they piled up until a person could hardly see the floor of their own life. But sometimes, when the room was quiet and no one was watching, one small repeated movement gave the body somewhere gentle to go. Fold one towel. Smooth one edge. Place it down. She did not need to become a better person inside that movement. She did not need to forgive the whole day, or understand why she was tired, or turn gratitude into something bright enough for anyone else to see. The warmth was enough. The unanswered message was still unanswered. And still, the room held. She folded another towel and set it beside the first. Then a shirt, then a small cloth with one corner wrinkled. The pile grew slowly on top of the dryer, near the bent receipt. For a while, those were the only two kinds of evidence in front of her, what had been carried, and what could now be placed down. A car passed outside. The sound came through faintly, then disappeared. She thought of all the mornings like this that had moved through her without being remembered. Mornings where she had answered too quickly, rushed too soon, made herself useful before she knew how much she had already spent. This one would probably disappear too. Most ordinary moments do. But for now, it was here. The dryer warmth. The laundry room. The receipt. The phone waiting its turn. Her own hand moving more slowly than before. She folded the last towel. Then she let both hands rest on the warm stack. For one quiet breath, nothing had to be held higher than it was. Later, she would answer the message. She would carry the folded laundry out of the room, one warm stack against her ribs, one towel slipping a little at the edge. She would step back into the kitchen, into the day, into whatever small need was already turning toward her. But the receipt stayed on top of the dryer for a while. Bent, quiet, no longer held. The laundry room kept its ordinary shape. The detergent bottle near the wall. The basket on the floor. The machine cooling slowly after its work. Nothing about it looked different from the outside. Still, something had been allowed to loosen there. Not enough for anyone to notice. Not enough to explain. Only enough for her hand to open around one small thing, and for the room to receive it without asking what came next. Sometimes gratitude is not a bright feeling. Sometimes it is the warmth left in a towel. The mercy of later. The phone unanswered for one more breath. A folded receipt resting beside clean clothes, proof that the day had asked much, and that one small part of it had finally been set down. She stood there before leaving, both hands resting on the warm stack. The house was quiet, but not empty. Somewhere in that quiet, there was still care. Still work. Still love moving through ordinary things without needing to be praised. And for that one narrow moment, before the next responsibility found her name, she did not have to hold herself so high. She could simply stand. Warm-handed. A little less braced. Still here.